like we have temperatures that we prefer, plants have temperatures that they prefer also. Plants are typically broken down into two groups, warm season and cool season. So you can have a warm season garden and a cool season garden. Now, keep in mind, I didn't just say hot and cold, because just like there's temperatures that are just too warm for us or too cold for us, plants are the same way. We're not talking about extremes, we're talking about warm and cool. So warm season plants like temperatures are about 75 to 80 degrees. That's when they grow their best. That doesn't mean they can't grow at 74, and it doesn't mean they can't grow when it's 85, but they have their optimum growing at 75 to 80 degrees. So they tend to be planted and grow well around March to July. Now, obviously here in Georgia, July is a little bit hot. So for us, for our purposes, most of our warm season plants are going to do better earlier in the year. Most people start their seeds out to make seedlings in March, and then they plant them outside, usually right after Easter, sometime in April. So about mid-April is a good time to get them in the garden and get your produce before the heat of July. But about 75 to 80 degrees, March and July is typically your warm season plants. Cool season plants grow optimally. That means they grow their best when temperatures are about 50 to 70 degrees. That doesn't mean that they can't grow a little bit on either side, but they grow best at 50 to 70. So their growing season, or when you will be gardening for them, would be August to December, and sometimes even a little bit longer here in Georgia. We usually get our coldest time into January to February. So August to December is when you would have your cool season plants, which would be things like lettuce, your greens, cabbage, broccoli, stuff like that. So a few notes about temperature in general. High temperatures, which is really what we're mostly concerned with here in Georgia, high temperatures can increase respiration. Respiration taking place in the mitochondria. Okay, so when respiration increases too much, your plant will basically overbreathe itself to death. It will basically, you could almost think if a plant was to hyperventilate, it would almost hyperventilate itself. Is breathing too much. When the respiration out produces, when there's more respiration or higher respiration rate, then there is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis being it's taking in light and carbon dioxide and making food. When it's breathing harder than it's making the food, then the plant will probably die. So with high temperatures, that's one thing that can happen, is your plant can overbreathe itself to death. And also because in high temperatures over 94 degrees, your respiration is basically going to stop. So your photosynthesis is basically going to stop. So your photosynthesis is going to start to slow down in your 90s, and it's going to stop at like 94 degrees. So in your 90s and up, your plant is not doing photosynthesis. So if that was to last a very long time, it's going to starve to death. Now, another thing, remember, your stoma opens when it's what kind of conditions? Light and humid. So let's say if it's light and hot, okay, your stoma is going to stay closed. So if your stoma stays closed, it cannot take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So if you have, it's very, very hot, it's very, very dry, drought, your stoma is not going to be taking in carbon dioxide to make the food. Your photosynthesis is going to slow down anyway, so your plant could actually starve to death or overbreathe itself to death, basically. How have some plants adapted to high temperatures? Well, some plants have formed a thicker cuticle, such as a cactus. So the cuticle is that waxy layer, and that layer actually keeps down transpiration so that your plant doesn't lose too much water and dehydrate, okay? So it protects the leaves themselves from getting sun damage, actual sunburn. So a thicker cuticle is how some plants have adapted to high temperatures. Some don't have thick cuticle though and haven't had time to adapt, so they will still can suffer sun damage. A couple of terms I want you to know. Thermoperiod. So if photoperiod is the length of light, then thermoperiod has something to do with the length of the temperature. You want your thermoperiod to change. You don't want just a long thermoperiod 24/7. You don't want the same thermoperiod. You want your temperature to change, and you want it to change 10 to 15 degrees day and night. So if your daytime temperature is, say, 85, you want your night temperature to be 70 to 75. And sometimes in Georgia, we don't get that much of a change, which can be a problem, especially more in the summer. So you really want that change in temperature to stimulate your plants to their best growth. That's another way that they know the night and days and get their growing cycles and their flowering cycles and all that in sync, is a change in thermoperiod. So 10 to 15 degrees. Vernalization, number of cold days. Number of cold days needed for germination, number of cold days needed for flowering, anything like that is actually stimulated by a change in temperature, all right? Or again, it could be a change in thermoperiod. So vernalization, you need to remember, and we've talked about it several times, touched on it, is the number of cold days. Now, we talked about how high temperatures can harm a plant by making it not perform photosynthesis, by making the respiration rate higher than the photosynthesis, which is not good for plants. What about cold temperatures? So some plants are what we would call frost hardy, and they can take lower temperatures, but most plants are going to have tissue damage starting at 40 degrees. So really, we do not want to let any of our plants get down below, down to 40 or below degrees, because that's where we're going to start having tissue damage. Also, if you have a freeze and you have the water in the soil freezes, we don't have that problem so much. But if you have that happen, then the plant's not going to be able to take up water. And if it can't take up water, of course, that's one of our ingredients in photosynthesis, so it can't do photosynthesis. All right, one last thing, I guess, if you have this isn't really temperature, but if it's really, really sort of rainy, foggy, things like that, that can also interfere with your photosynthesis. So temperature, very important for plant growth. Understand your warm season and cool season plants, and I'll see you next time.